Welcome to the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast. It's November 13, 2017, and this is episode 595. Having just completed my first tour of Morocco, today we start a short series of travelogues to walk you through our antics in this wonderful land. I have to tell you, before visiting Morocco for the first time this year, I wasn't sure what I'd make of it, but right off the bat, I'm happy to tell you that I've pretty much fallen in love with Morocco and her wonderful people. Over the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll discuss the various aspects of the tour that I enjoyed and also touch on some of the more challenging aspects of Morocco, such as the Moroccan tendency to be a little camera shy. Although that didn't turn out to be as big a problem as I'd anticipated. With one person having to cancel shortly before the tour due to an injury and another being replaced by his son at the last minute, I ended up with a group of 9 photographers, and we travelled with an experienced guide with a poetic turn of phrase that almost had me in tears on numerous occasions. Our bus driver didn't speak a great deal of English, but he more than made up for it with his kind manner and thankfully incredibly safe driving. For a first tour, there were a number of teething problems, such as our bus that was, although roomy enough for the group, was definitely not the most comfortable bus I've used by any stretch of the imagination. And not being able to see the horizon through the front window of our seats, we had more travel sickness than I've known on any bus-based tour to date. There were a few locations on my itinerary that will be dropping as well, but all in all, I was very happy with this tour and can't wait to go back in 2018 just as soon as we've nailed down our dates over the next week or so. We started our tour in Casablanca, with most of the group arriving on the afternoon of October 29. For those that were already in town, from 4 p.m. we ventured out for the first time and visited a local beach from which we did some long exposure photographs of the Hassan II Mosque, as you can see in this first image for today. Remember that if you would like to view the images larger and you're not already on the blog, head over to the blog at mbp.ac/595 and click on the images to look at them in the lightbox. Relatively new, the Hassan II Mosque was completed in 1993 and is the largest mosque in Morocco and the 13th largest in the world, although its minaret is the largest in the world at 210 meters or 689 feet tall. It may be hard to get a real sense of scale from this photo, but we drove over and walked around the grounds of the mosque shortly after shooting this photograph, and as you can see from this next image, there is some pretty impressive architecture here. I'm not really sure what you'd call this. It's kind of an archway, but then we have the fountain below with the incredible mosaic patterns that decorate much of the architecture in Morocco. We would later learn that there is a lot of significance in the number of shapes that make up the circular patterns in the mosaic and the relationship between the various circles, etc. I love how we can see in this photograph that people come to the mosque with their families and the children are playing on their scooters, and we also saw some playing with balls and balloons. As I walked around the grounds of the mosque, I noticed a man walk up to a little boy playing with a balloon, and while holding his face with hands on both cheeks, he gave the boy a great big kiss. I had expected him to then greet his nearby father or something, but after kissing the boy, he simply turned and walked away. The following day, I saw a woman do this to a little girl as we left a site that we'd stopped at, and again simply walked away from the girl and mother without any conversation. I asked our guide if this was a common thing in Morocco, and his reply was simply that children are a symbol of love. This felt so profound to me and was the first thing that he'd said that would nearly bring a tear to my eye. I felt a little ashamed that in Western culture there is now so much stigma involved in even looking at other people's kids, let alone giving them a great big kiss. With my own cultural background, I don't necessarily want to do this myself either, but I thought it was such a beautiful gesture and poetic turn of phrase on our guide's part. The following day, we headed for Rabat, the capital city of Morocco, where we made our first stop at the Chela necropolis, at the gates of which we had our first encounter with these typical Moroccan street performers. I was in two minds as to whether to share this photo or not, but decided to go ahead to help me document the trip more than anything else. We'd see this type of performance a number of times as we travelled, with the performers twirling a tassel on their hats in time with their music. Photography-wise, I'm not proud of this shot, but I'd like to note that I made a conscious decision to try to use aperture priority with auto ISO on this trip, rather than manual mode, as I knew we'd be working with changing light most of the time, and to be honest, automatic exposure of any kind usually frustrates the hell out of me, and I felt that I needed to get over that to a degree, so I was sticking with it. After photographing the street performers, we walked down to the necropolis, and I shot a number of photos, but nothing really worth sharing. After this, we drove to the mausoleum of Mohammed V, which was absolutely stunning, and I shot a number of photographs of the young guards there. Perhaps my favourite photograph from this spot, though, was this one of a man in a fez at the Al Hassan Mosque next door. Many Moroccans will wave you off when you raise a camera, or even politely ask if it's okay to take a photograph, and some will get a little angry. So at this point, as I tried to figure this out, I was still shooting most of my images with people going about their daily business, and they just happened to be strategically placed in my photograph. I was already photographing this door as the gentleman walked through the scene, but I liked the added touch, especially with the splash of red on his fez, and the way his suit matches the colour of the paving and almost matches the wall colour too. I had my camera set to use a minimum shutter speed of a 250th of a second and then increase the ISO while using my selected aperture. I really dislike using exposure compensation as I'm not used to it, but for this image I dialed in +1 stop on the exposure compensation to ensure that I got a nice bright image. Leaving the Atlantic coast, after this we headed inland to Chefchaouen, the Blue City. It was dark by the time we got there, so we were shown to our rooms before heading down for dinner in our hotel, then off to try to get a good night's sleep before walking around the town the following day. As we walked through the back streets of Chefchaouen in the fresh morning air, we'd see people occasionally flit across a pathway, as the lady in this photograph did. She's far enough away not to be recognisable, but generally, as they get closer, if you don't lower your camera, they'll ask you not to photograph them. I like the accent that the lady adds to the photograph though, so I'm pleased that I snapped it before she continued down the stairs. Although you can sometimes get a photo sneakily as the people draw nearer, I generally lowered my camera before they got too close so as not to upset them. From the protests we heard when the cameras weren't lowered early enough, it's pretty obvious that they generally just don't like being photographed. In addition to the blue paint and flower pots that often decorate the walls, shops are also an integral part of the Blue City, so their wares are often interspersed among the general decor, as you can see in this image. The owner of this shop seemed to be a nice fellow, with a smile from ear to ear as we photographed outside. Some shop owners do get frustrated that we didn't always buy something from them, but by the end of the trip, we'd probably bought more than most groups do, in a bid to help the local economy. Not to mention the amount we spent in tips, literally buying photographs, but we'll talk about that later. In this next image, we see a man working in the bakery. He's not the baker, we were told, rather a man that books time to use the oven and is contracted to bake bread for a number of families. He sounds very much like a baker to me, but he's not the baker. Our guide bought us a loaf of his piping hot bread, which was absolutely delicious, straight out of the oven. Because it was so dark, my camera had hit the 6400 ISO limit that I'd set as the maximum in my auto ISO settings, and had started to push my shutter speed to a 15th of a second with an aperture of f4.5 for this photograph. It will maintain the minimum of 250th of a second only until it reaches the maximum ISO that I set. Because of this, although I asked the man to put some bread into the oven and I couldn't get him to hold his pose while I photographed, this is really one of just a few frames that I got that did not suffer a bit too much from subject movement. I think the new 85mm f1.4 lens from Canon might be in order for next year's trip, so that I can capitalize on some of these indoor low light opportunities just a little bit more. In this next image, I caught another passerby as they crossed the top of this flight of blue steps. We heard that when the floor is painted like this, in addition to the walls, it means there's no throughway. The street leads to a dead end. Although the contrast between the shadow side and the fully lit side of this alley is quite harsh, I quite like this shot because that tiny patch of blue sky at the top center is almost exactly the same color as the painted masonry. And again, a number of flower pots have been strategically placed on the sides of the steps. The people of Chefchaouen really do seem to be proud of their beautiful blue city, and rightly so. For the next photo, I had a quick decision to make. We were photographing at a place where lots of people were walking around, and I didn't want to get in the way, so I decided not to switch to my 11 to 24mm lens in my pocket. Rather, I flipped my camera up vertically and shot 3 images handheld and stitched them together in Photoshop to make this image. Again, we can see how proud the people of this town are, making it a must visit for visitors to Morocco. Expect to have to work around the dislike of having their photos taken, but this doesn't go for everyone. As we walk past the young man in this next photograph, one of our participants asked if it was okay to photograph him. And although the answer was no problem, my guest assumed that the no would be followed by the usual refusal and started to continue past. This gentleman was not only open to having his photograph taken, he was one of the very few that refused a tip in return for us capturing his likeness. I was conscious to try and line this man up with the blue door behind him as a background, just to clean it up a little. And also because it matches his turban nicely. And I opened up my aperture to f5 to blur the background too. I love his expression in this photo and that he has a catchlight in each of his eyes. On just day 3 of the tour, I didn't take him up on his offer to buy a turban simply because I didn't think I'd be able to tie it properly. And I didn't want to hold the group up either. But having seen our guide help a number of people in the group with their new headscarves, I think I'll get something from this guy next year. I'd love to help the local community as much as possible, and I will probably take a print of this photo back for him too, as it's become one of my favourites. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our first 10 photographs for this Morocco tour travelogue series. As you'll see in the coming weeks, we actually end up getting some portrait opportunities later in the trip that absolutely blew me away. So don't think that it's all bad based on some of the comments this week. It turns out that Moroccans can be very photogenic under the right circumstances. I'm currently finalising dates for 2018 and I'm hoping to start taking bookings by the end of this week or early next week if possible. If you'd like first dibs, please subscribe to our tours and workshops newsletter at mbp.ac/news and be among the first to know when the tour becomes available for booking. If you're listening after November 20, 2017, details will be on the updated tour page at mbp.ac/Morocco. Thanks very much for listening today. If you enjoy this podcast, please share a link with your friends. Subscribe in iTunes or your favorite podcast program to ensure uninterrupted delivery. If you have a moment to rate the podcast or leave us a review in iTunes, that helps to keep us relevant in the huge number of podcasts out there now. You can find me on Google+, Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, and links to everything I'm up to are at martinbaileyphotography.com, so do drop by and take a look. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, you take care and have a great week, whatever you're doing. Bye-bye.